It's OPB Politics Now for Friday, May 31st. Millions of Oregonians avoided their ballots this spring like that chatty neighbor at a Memorial Day barbecue. Turnout for this year's primary was less than 35% as of Friday morning, but more than 1 million people did vote, and some of the results were dramatic. For example, Multnomah County District Attorney Mike Schmidt was shown the door after a single term. So was his loss a major warning sign for progressives or just the product of a prosecutor who made a weak case for re-election? Today, we're going to talk about what this much-watched race means, if anything, for Portland political races this fall. Welcome to the podcast. I'm OPB Politics reporter Dirk VanderHart.
I'm OPB Portland City Government reporter Alex Zielinski.
And I'm OPB's criminal justice and legal affairs reporter Conrad Wilson.
It is a pleasure to have both of you here. So, Alex, it was hard to miss on election night that the two presumed frontrunners for Portland mayor were out on the town supporting their DA of choice. You were watching City Commissioner Carmen Rubio react to the results at Schmidt's election party. Conrad was across town at Nathan Vasquez's event, where Commissioner Rene Gonzalez was throwing his arm around the victor's shoulder. What should we make of this?
Yeah, Schmidt's party was much less fun than the party Conrad was at. But like you said, both Rubio and Gonzalez are running for mayor in November, and they are considered the top candidates in part due to the amount of money that they've raised so far. And so their election night choices and their endorsements in that race say a lot about the voter base that they're hoping to win over in the fall. And those folks all showed up at both of those parties on election night. And also, shows what values and issues they're going to be campaigning on and kind of maybe whose shoes they're hoping to fill come November, in terms of following where the DA races ended up.
Yeah, I mean, there are some clear common threads, I think, between the issues of that DA's race and what we expect in the mayor's race. Walk us through some of these similar themes, some of these echoes that we're going to hear in November that we just got done hearing about in May.
Yeah. So first, I want to point out that the dynamics of these two races paint a picture of the two kind of current factions of Portland's Democratic circles or more progressive circles. We have Schmidt and Rubio leading into more of what I'd call a left-wing kind of traditional Portland progressivism, advocating for more housing to address homelessness, more drug treatment for people charged with low-level drug crimes. Both have focused on policies around police accountability while in office. And then you have Vasquez and Gonzalez, who are decidedly more moderate and centrist, who call for harsher penalties for people charged with low-level crimes and for people camping on city sidewalks. And they want a stronger police force. One thing I want to point out also is that, at least in this past election, it felt like the race was almost more about what voters were projecting onto these two candidates than what they were actually running on. We heard Schmidt pitch as this big deal progressive reformer while he was out there running kind of a more moderate campaign, trying to rope in those centrist voters. And then Vasquez was essentially talked about as the anti-Schmidt, this kind of more traditional law and order type guy who will crack down on everything people are sick and tired of. When in reality, he has also called himself a progressive prosecutor like Schmidt and is interested in new solutions to problems in the criminal justice system. So to me, this race felt more about what these people represented to voters than anything.
Well, and you and I think a lot of other people this week were sort of trying to answer or get some sense of what this all means about the mood of Portland voters more broadly. I mean, when you talk to outside observers, political analysts, all those types about the race, I mean, how are they viewing the result? Is this some totem that we should be looking at authoritatively, or what do they think?
Yeah, I mean, I did speak to a lot of folks, and as you can imagine, the results are pretty mixed. Some people are pretty confident that this shows a pendulum swing to the center after years of more liberal politicians leading in the metro area. And others say this just shows a strong anti-incumbent bias, that people are simply fed up with the status quo, and they will vote anyone out who is currently in charge, like Schmidt. The main agreement kind of among everyone is that local voters are just frustrated and seeking a change. But most people I spoke with, they were really hesitant to say that the change is a big shift away from kind of leftist politics, and it'll be hard to tell until November.
Okay, so we don't necessarily know that this playbook, this set of talking points that Vasquez was successful with, are going to be very successful for people running for city council or in this mayor's race. A lot of people will be watching yet.
Yeah, it's interesting to kind of try to read the tea leaves on this. Like I said before, these predictions are kind of all over the map. Some say that, yes, 100% in November, mayoral candidates will win if they can appeal to more moderate voters. Others kind of point to the precinct by precinct breakdown of the DA race results, which show that Schmidt had by far more support in Portland city limits, while support for Vasquez was stronger in the suburbs, which could tell us that a progressive mayoral candidate may still have a strong chance of winning in Portland proper. And then there's the whole incumbency issue. The top two mayoral candidates are already sitting in City Hall. They're both incumbents. So if voters are unhappy with the current leadership and want change, they might not be eager to vote for either. So it's hard to make any big generalizations about how a citywide race will play out in 6 months. One thing that we do know is that outside money will probably play a big role. Mayoral candidates are more limited in the size of donations that they can collect this year due to a uniquely packed city council race that has whittled away funds. So they'll be turning to outside committees to fund campaigns that support them. And, this also played a big role in the DA's race as well. They don't really have limits on how much they can raise, but they still were a lot of outside organizations campaigning for and against them.
Yeah, and as we've talked about, outside spending is set to be a greater and greater factor in Oregon politics moving forward. So the city of Portland, Multnomah County are seeing some of that early action. I think we should note here that it was not just the DA's race that people might, looking for the mood of the Portland electorate, are probably pointing to, right? We've talked on the podcast about Maxine Dexter winning in the 3rd congressional district for the Democratic nomination against Sushila Jayapal, who a lot of people pointed to as sort of the more progressive candidate. People look to Janelle Bynum winning the Democratic nomination in the 5th congressional district over Jamie McLeod Skinner, who some people pegged as the more progressive candidate. And I think people are looking at those things and suggesting, progressivism is on the ropes right now in Portland. Other people say, as you know, Alex, it's just not that clear. And it is obviously very hard to be definitive. But I guess I look at those things and I look again at, some of the county commission races where Shannon Singleton in District 2 was by far the biggest vote getter, but the two sort of pro-business, more law and order oriented candidates, Sam Adams and Jesse Burke, split a vote that was larger than what Singleton got. And it does seem to suggest to me that maybe people are really so concerned about what they're seeing that we will continue to see this sort of momentum toward the center, I guess, in Portland. Conrad, I want to turn to you, though, because you have also been thinking and looking pretty deeply at this DA's race. I mean, what does Nathan Vasquez, our incoming DA, say about all this? Does he view this victory as a repudiation of progressive policies somehow and Portlanders completely snapping back to some sort of other reality?
He does not. I mean, he really told me that he rejects the premise that, especially the national media has put on the race. As you've kind of both described, this progressive community rejecting a progressive prosecutor. He's the way he's sort of talking about it is just somebody who wants to do the work, get in the office, kind of focus on prosecutions. At the same time, he is talking a more law and order agenda. He's at his election night party. Folks like Jordan Schnitzer are there, who, big real estate developers, big money behind Vasquez. Renee Gonzalez is there, as you pointed out, Jesse Burke. I mean, there are kind of more traditional Democratic candidates, independent candidates that are maybe staking out a more center position than progressives. And that's something that I think a lot of folks, there was a lot of appeal that obviously Vasquez was able to tap into, sort of talking about going after lower level crimes and just like projecting himself as kind of more of a law and order type candidate. And when I asked him about it the day after the election, just as the results had been called, shortly after Mike Schmidt had called Nathan Vasquez to concede the race. And this is what Vasquez told me.
I mean, one thing I want to make clear is that, I fully recognize that this community in no way is wanting to abandon kind of the progressive ideas that Mike Schmidt ran on, and there was a significant amount of the community that voted for him, and so I want to make sure that it's clear that I don't intend in any way to, abandon, or I don't see this as a, referendum on that.
So yeah, I mean, he doesn't see this as a referendum on sort of the progressive values that Mike Schmidt sort of ran the office under. Again, Nathan Vasquez there kind of just talking a little bit about his views on the race, just moments after the election had been really, really decided for him.
Well, and you took a bit of a deeper dive this week, I think, into those actual election results, the numbers behind them. And I think I heard you say it is pretty remarkable just how many voters abandoned Schmidt really this year that had voted for him in 2020, even with the lower turnout. I mean, what did it look like?
Yes, much lower voter turnout. Something about 30,000 fewer people voted in Multnomah County. Schmidt won in 2020 with, about 77% of the vote or so. And he was much closer to 46%. Those aren't finalized numbers, but even if you do factor in that fewer people voted, that's just a really kind of dramatic sort of eroding of your base.
We have talked a lot about politics. I think you got to this a little bit, Conrad, but just in terms of policy, right? We will have a new DA. We have had this really hard fought, really ugly in some instances fight about the direction this DA will take versus the last. And I think you've been talking to a lot of folks in law enforcement circles or the prosecutorial world, trying to get a sense of what this changing of the guard actually means on the ground, day to day, for people in Multnomah County and the court system and all of that. I mean, what sense do you come away with from those conversations?
Well, in talking to representatives in the business community and talking to other district attorneys in neighboring counties and talking to law enforcement, there's sort of this sense that Nathan Vasquez is going to be facing some of the same challenges that Mike Schmidt faced and was criticized for. I mean, things such as drug use, drug dealing, violent crime, gun violence, and just like a reputational issue that certainly Portland is working through. A lot of other folks also pointed, though, to the fact that they think things are getting a lot better. They think things are getting a lot, I don't know, there seems some just big improvements in, folks point to like the way that law enforcement dealt with the protests at PSU is sort of, that didn't become 2020. That didn't descend into something that felt, like there was a lot of civil unrest happening in kind of the city's urban center, right? And what's interesting, I think what you could sort of see is Vasquez being able to kind of capitalize and be able to successfully sort of co-opt, the improvement that is happening across wide swaths of the county. I mean, certainly, again, overdoses are really, really high, and gun violence is really stubborn. There are still a lot of homicides this year than historically there have been in Portland. So it's not that, there aren't huge issues that Vasquez is going to have to deal with. But he's also going to benefit from kind of being a fresh face and also someone who's deeply familiar to the law enforcement community, and at least will benefit in the short term from the perception that he's willing to work with law enforcement in a way that Schmidt had the perception that he wasn't, and that he's going to be kind of open to taking calls from the business community and folks that are paying a lot of property taxes, folks that are kind of responsible for a lot of jobs in Portland, and so that's going to be something I think that at least the expectation from kind of those constituencies is that they sort of have maybe, I don't know, there's an openness to they have with Vasquez in a way that some of those constituencies, whether it be law enforcement or the business community, feel they did not.
Right. I mean, you spoke with, the police union. You spoke with other prosecutors who said Mike sort of went his own way. He didn't talk to us. We didn't feel like we had a good relationship with him. And we really feel like that's going to change under Vasquez. And it will be very, very interesting to me just to see, one, whether that plays out, and two, does that sort of magical kumbaya dynamic or whatever we're about to see lead to some sort of dramatic increase in the results we are seeing on the streets, or some swifter end to some of this disorder and all that. I think these interrelationships and maybe those being improved will be very, very interesting to watch.
One of the most interesting people I did speak to was Multnomah County District Attorney Mike Schmidt. And, we talked briefly this week, and he sort of told me that one of the things that, Vasquez runs the risk of is basically that, he sort of presented himself as being able to solve a lot of the problems that Schmidt has been criticized for, but some of those might be outside of his control. And so here's what Schmidt said.
I think one of the biggest challenges he's going to face is that he sold a vision that the district attorney can fix those things. I think he will quickly learn that that's not accurate. The only way to navigate these systemic issues, whether it's overdoses, whether it's gun violence, homelessness, right? It is you have to have incredible collaboration at all levels. And that takes relationship building, knowing who you can work with, forging alliances. It's going to be a real learning curve for him to step into that situation if the district attorney is actually going to play a productive role in these very intractable problems.
That's Mike Schmidt making his first remarks since losing the race to Nathan Vasquez. Spoke to him earlier this week.
And let's put a fine point on something before we leave, at least as fine as we can. People will remember that in 2020, when Schmidt won the race early, there was a lot going on in our society, obviously. And then DA Rod Underhill made the decision that he would step down early, let Schmidt into office for good or ill, a lot earlier than he expected. My sense in talking to you and Alex is that is not in the works right now, that Schmidt plans to fill out the rest of his term. Is that right?
That's right. I mean, Schmidt has made pretty clear, and Vasquez has said as much, that, at this point, this change, I guess, that voters have made pretty clear that they want, Schmidt's going to stay through the end of the year, and Vasquez won't take over until January as things stand now. So some of this change that voters are kind of, I don't know if you could say clamoring for, but certainly are advocating strongly that they want a new district attorney in Multnomah County. The change is not going to be immediate. It's going to be something that Schmidt says he's going to stay through the end of the year. So,
okay. All right. We will leave it there for today. Thanks to both of you for your reporting on this. This week's episode was produced by Andrew Thien, and our audio engineer is Stephen Cray. Our music comes from Audio Network. We'll be back next week with more political news from across the Pacific Northwest. Until then, you can find all of OPB's reporting, including Conrad and Alex's reporting on the DA's race, at opb.org. Thanks for your support, and thanks for listening.